Good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 285 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where we wonder if there's a baggage charge when the traveler is the bag.
Have you not listened to a word Mary said, man? He's not a bag.
Not what Elfhelm says.
Folks, pull up a bench in the common room and join us. I'm Marcel, the Tolkienist, and I'm here with a man of the West who, coincidentally, is also gnarled as an old stone ancestor.
Well, I think my beard might be a little less mossy than old Han's, though. So, folks, join us as Mary refuses to be put in the overhead compartment, Théoden meets with a strange man, and we find a really nice side road to avoid traffic in the first of two long episodes on the short chapter, The Ride of the Rohirrim, the fifth chapter in The Return of the King.
Folks, some of you are hearing this podcast for the very first time, and to you, we bid a very warm welcome. Here at the Prancing Pony Podcast, we are reading, talking, speculating, and often joking our way through Middle-earth a few pages at a time.
That's right. Now, we do take a deep dive into the lore. We explore how the story came to be, talk about our favorite themes, and a whole lot more.
But in a lighthearted and fun way, like friends chatting at the pub, which we have actually done a number of times by now, I might add.
That's true.
And we are glad you've joined us. We
are indeed. Yeah, that's right. The last time was in Oxford at the White Horse Inn, if I recall correctly.
Oh, yes, it was quite a lovely stay. And, we went off from a different sort of conference and meetup, but we'll talk later about that.
That's true. We will indeed. But before we get to tonight's discussion, it's time for me to spend a few minutes with the real-life Lord of the Mark and my good friend, Sean Marchese, for another fan-favorite Philology Faire. So, Sean, what do you have for us tonight?
Oh, we've got some great stuff tonight, Alan, and it's always lovely to be back. Thanks for having me back here.
Always a pleasure to have you.
Really wonderful to be here. Well, look, today in the text, we hear those mysterious drums in the hills, which Mary imagines might be enemies. But Elfhelm explains that these are the Woses, the wild men of the woods. Now, if you've read The Lord of the Rings before, not just seen the movie, but actually read the book, you'll know who those Woses are. But you may not realize that Tolkien didn't invent the word woes. In the nomenclature, Tolkien tells us that this word, and I'm quoting here, represents modernized the Rohan word for old men of the woods. It is not a purely invented word. The supposed genuine Rohan word was wasa, plural wasan, which, if it had survived into modern English, would be woses. It would have been better to call the wild men wood woses, for that actually occurs in Old English woodewasa, glossing faunus, satirus, savage men, evil creatures. And Tolkien then goes on to explain that this word woodewasa became woodoses, which he says was often corrupted to woodhouses and survives in heraldry, since the woodhouse equals a wild, hairy man clad in leaves, common as a supporter to arms.
A wild, hairy man clad in leaves. I'm trying not to feel called out by that.
I mean, it's you to a T, really.
It really is, except for the supporter to arms bit. I'm just like, I don't want any bit of that. No,
not at all.
So if one of these Woses were to, I don't know, get married, then you would have a wed Wose. So romantic.
Yeah, totally.
All right.
We haven't had many Blazing Saddles.
I don't know that we've had more than one or two in
like
280 episodes. That might be the first in a while.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah. Well, folks, what Tolkien's talking about there is the common medieval image of the wild man. Now, this is a mythical figure of a human being covered in hair who is believed to live in the forest. I'm almost thinking Sasquatch at this point. Outside the boundaries of the civilized world, at least by
there's going to be pictures of him, like kind of like walking, with the arms outstretched, looking off to the side. Yeah,
with a beef jerky in his hand.
Right. Messing with Sasquatch.
This image of the wild man was a common trope in heraldry, and it appeared in more than 200 coats of arms across Europe, often seen holding a shield or literally supporting the coat of arms of the family in question. Now, Tolkien says in the nomenclature that the origin of this idea was no doubt the actual existence of wild folk, remnants of former peoples driven out by invaders, or of outlaws living a debased and savage life in forests and mountains.
Right. So you can imagine that people actually would have been cast out of society and then you'd go live in the woods. And
you're exiled. And then what? Well, you're going to go find a place to live. Yeah.
Right. Proper outlaws. And
wow.
Of course, they're not going to, they're not going to comb their hair. They're not going to shave. They're going to be I mean, I'd like to think they would still be wearing something more than leaves, but who knows?
Yeah, well, I know. I'm thinking the same thing.
Your clothes aren't going to last forever, I suppose.
No, especially in that day and age, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. But yeah, I mean, that's what Tolkien says explains the use of wasa, which, Tolkien says that meant originally a forlorn or abandoned person. So that is very fitting with this idea of someone who's an outlaw or an exile.
Yeah.
I find it very interesting that over time, this Old English wudewasa became corrupted into modern English as woodhouse.
Yeah.
That's very strange. I'll never read Jane Austen's Emma the same way again. To imagine the woodhouses as a bunch of
crazy, hairy wild men
wearing leaves. Yeah. Well,
interesting.
Folks probably won't be too surprised to learn that Tolkien actually knew this word from Middle English. He actually would have been aware that the Middle English form of the word, which is wodwos, actually appeared in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Of course, we know how well he knew that poem.
Yeah.
I was kind of surprised to find that this word was not used in reference to the Green Knight himself, because, the Green Knight, he fits that kind of green man, wild man kind of archetype. You'd think that he would be a good candidate for a wodwos. But no, actually, in Sir Gawain, the word wodwos appears in reference to something totally different. It's apparently a plural, and there's a part when the poet is describing these various creatures and monsters that Gawain fights while he's on his journey, and he says, "Sumwil with wodwos that wanted in the Canaris," which means sometimes he fought with woodwoses that dwelt in the crags. So whatever they are, they were a bunch of them dwelling in the crags, and he was fighting with them as he kind of made
If
his
you
way
say
through the
so. That was
countryside.
pretty impressive Middle English right there, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Now, Ring of Words also reminds us that woodwoes, now that's Tolkien's modernized form of the word, appears elsewhere in the Legendarium, and you all might remember this. It specifically shows up in The Children of Hurin. Sean, do you remember when Saeros, the elf of Menegroth, taunts Turin at Thingol's table?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, of course.
Unwise, Saeros, unwise. He calls Turin woodwoes no less than 3 times in about 3 minutes, and here's the passage. Then Turin took up a drinking vessel and cast it in Saeros' face, and he fell backward with great hurt. And Turin drew his sword and would have run at him, but Mablung restrained him. Then Saeros, rising, spat blood upon the board, and spoke as best he could with a broken mouth. How long shall we harbor this woodwoes? Who rules here tonight? I know, I'm wanting to do it like all broken teeth. How long shall we harbor this woodwoes? It's like broken teeth.
Heavy, but yeah.
Who rules here tonight? The king's law is heavy upon those who hurt his lieges in the hall, and for those who draw blades there, outlawry is the least doom. Outside the hall, I could answer you, woodwoes.
That's like a literal "let's take this outside" kind
That
of
is
thing.
literally, let's take it outside.
But he's also calling them woodwoes and also talking about outlawry, which I think is very interesting.
Exactly, the outlawry, because he's going to be exiled for this, and he becomes a woodwoes as a result. That would be what would happen. So back to that passage. But when Turin saw the blood upon the table, his mood became cold, and with a shrug he released himself from Mablung and left the hall without a word. Then Mablung said to Saeros, "Bro, what's your problem?" No, he said,
"You mad, bro? Go on."
I mean, seriously, man, what are you thinking? That is kind of what he says. That's the gist of it. Instead, he says this: "What ails you tonight? For this evil I hold you to blame, and maybe the king's law will judge a broken mouth a just return for your taunting." I love that. Go Mablung.
You deserve to have your teeth knocked out, Saeros.
Seriously. Go pick up your teeth from wherever they got scattered. We'll see what we can do. Man. But then again, Saeros uses the woodwoes again in this next paragraph, and this is it, I promise. "If the cub has a grievance, let him bring it to the king's judgment," answered Saeros. "But the drawing of swords here is not to be excused for any such cause. Outside the hall, if the woodwoes draws on me, I shall kill him." Or maybe not.
Well, he didn't kill him.
No.
Not quite. It
No,
didn't
not
work
quite.
out that way.
In fact, when he tried to, he was defeated in battle and then chased by Turin until he plummeted to his untimely death.
Yeah. Woodwoes 1, Elf 0. But that's
Really haughty elf 0.
really
Yeah.
haughty Elf 0.
My goodness.
Talk about somebody who's all talk. Yeah, that's really interesting and really cool that Tolkien uses the word woodwoes 3 times in this.
Yeah.
It's like 4 paragraphs, like really short paragraphs.
all of them out of Saeros's mouth. I mean, it's clearly an insult.
Yeah, very much so. Not exactly subtle.
No,
he's really overdoing. It's like, yeah, he's a woodwose. Yeah, and did I mention he's a woodwose? You know, like he just keeps on.
And if that woodwose does this again,
he's really trying to impress the elves of Thingol's Hall. Just like, I know the word woodwose, and I'm going to use it.
That's right. That's right. Woodwassa. I'm gonna.
Yeah.
I do think Mablung basically did tell him though, what is wrong with you, man?
Yeah. What ails you tonight?
What ails you tonight? What do you have stuck in
nuts?
Your various body
doing?
parts?
Have you seen this guy? Like,
this guy's ripped, man.
Don't pick a fight with, of all the guys to pick a fight with in the dining hall, you're going to pick that one.
That guy.
The big, scary, unkempt-haired guy who's been, fighting out in the woods for weeks or months or whatever it's been at this point.
Seriously.
Crazy.
Unwise. Well, that was a fascinating Philology Faire, Sean. Thank you for coming by the Common Room. You are always welcome here. It's always a pleasure to have you.
So much fun to be here. Thanks for having me again, and I'll see you soon.
Yeah, you will. Looking forward to that. Well, folks, it is always a joy to have Sean back on the show, and I'm certainly grateful for his help with the word woses. We're going to encounter that and have a little bit more on it later this episode.
I'm sure we will. For now, though, why don't we go ahead and get into the text? Ellen, would you start us out tonight?
I'd be happy to, Marcel. We're going to start at the very beginning of the chapter because it's a very good place to start. It was dark, and Merry could see nothing as he lay on the ground rolled in a blanket. Yet, though the night was airless and windless, all about him hidden trees were sighing softly. He lifted his head. Then he heard it again, a sound like faint drums in the wooded hills and mountain steppes. The throb would cease suddenly, and then be taken up again at some other point, now nearer, now further off. He wondered if the watchman had heard it. He could not see them, but he knew that all round him were the companies of the Rohirrim. He could smell the horses in the dark, and could hear their shiftings and their soft stamping on the needle-covered ground. The host was bivouacked in the pine woods that clustered about Eileach Beacon, a tall hill standing up from the long ridges of the Druidon forest that lay beside the great road in East Anorion. Tired as he was, Merry could not sleep. He had ridden now for 4 days on end, and the ever-deepening gloom had slowly weighed down his heart. He began to wonder why he had been so eager to come, when he had been given every excuse, even his lord's command, to stay behind. He wondered, too, if the old king knew that he had been disobeyed and was angry. Perhaps not. There seemed to be some understanding between Dernhelm and Elfhelm, the marshal who commanded the Éored in which they were riding. He and all his men ignored Merry and pretended not to hear if he spoke. He might have been just another bag that Dernhelm was carrying. Dernhelm was no comfort. He never spoke to anyone. Merry felt small, unwanted, and lonely. Now the time was anxious, and the host was in peril.
Thank you very much for this first reading for tonight.
Yeah, no problem.
We start off with the Ride of the Rohirrim, which is probably one of my favorite chapters in all of Lord of the Rings, I have to say.
Well, then I'm glad it's the chapter you got to host with me.
Well, what a coincidence, isn't it, Alan?
I'm sure it is. I'm only sad that it's so short and it's going to be covered in 2 episodes instead of 4 or 5, like Siege of Gondor or Battle of Pelennor Fields or something.
Yeah, true. Well, we started in the beginning of the chapter with, the perspective that we are choosing is Merry, and it's still dark. Mm-hmm. It's before the sun even has risen. Mm-hmm. And, he's not really happy about things because what is going on, there's somewhere in a place where, there are drums. As far as I remember, it's March 14th for those of you who want to keep track of the timeline.
That's right. And to remind you what's going on this particular day, Minas Tirith is now besieged, and tonight, at the end of March 14th, the Witch King is going to assault the gates. At the same time, Aragorn captured the fleet last night and is preparing to set sail from Pelargir. And over in Mordor, well, Sam finds Frodo in the Tower of Cirith Ungol today. So that brings you up to speed.
Yeah. So, let's talk about Tolkien keeping all the strands of the story together. There's so much happening at the same time. It's absolutely incredible. And with Merry, I mean, when you're in the dark and you hear sounds much more clearly, you discern them much easier. And he hears these faint drums. Sometimes they're a bit further away, sometimes they're coming closer, which, would either mean people are moving or there are a lot of people at
Or
different positions very
or
clear to
possibly
you.
both. That's
you
right.
know, and
Yeah.
there you
It's
go.
got to be a little nerve-wracking. We do note, interestingly, it says that he heard it again. So even though it's the first time that we as the reader are hearing it through Mary's ears, it is something that Mary has noticed before. And you mentioned how, it's so quiet, everything gets picked up even more clearly. He wonders if the watchmen have noticed it, though.
Well, if the watchman of the Rohirrim had noticed this, nothing against Mary. True, he's a very clever young hobbit.
Yeah, he's astute. He's sharp. Yeah,
definitely. But the thing is, it's so dark. He can't see any of them. But he knows he is surrounded by the Rohirrim because, everyone out there who has a horse, you can hear and smell them.
Oh yes, you can.
Well, the thing is, they are actually camped out. We've moved down closer to Gondor, obviously, and we are now somewhere in a pine forest. You can smell
the needles,
the pine needles.
Yeah, I could smell that in the air. It's great.
When you step on pine needles, there's a very, very distinct feel to it. To me, I'm sure I'm probably going to be corrected on this, but I love it because it looks so German to me. It's Eilenach to me, not Eilenach. As probably most people will say.
Eilenach, actually. The EI is pronounced A.
Exactly. Yeah. There you go.
I know. I had a hard time, too, because I did take high school German. I may not remember a single word, but I do know some of the pronunciation rules. So for me, that was always Eilenach, but it is Eilenach. Now, for those of you who don't know the word bivouac, it is just a temporary camp without tents or cover. So they're just sleeping on the ground. This is as bare bones as it gets. And now we have talked about Eilenach before. I shouldn't say we, not Marcel and I, but I with different co-hosts have talked about this before, as it is the only one of the Beacon Hills with a name that Tolkien says is an alien name, not Sindarin, Númenorian, or common speech.
Well, it's located between Nardal to the west and Amundin to the east, and that is, which is the closest to Minas Tirith.
Right. Exactly.
It's also the first mention that we get. The word that comes along for the first time is Druadan Forest.
That's right. Now, interestingly, as Hammond and Skull observed, Tolkien in his unfinished index defines Druadan Forest as the woods between Eilenach and Deen, while defining Druadan as firth or enclosure of the Druad. Dru meaning wild or untamed, a woodwose. So that goes back, of course, to the Philology Faire we just heard.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously something also that Tom Shippey back in the day had taken up in his book so much, and which he loved explaining so much. And and Tolkien later on explained that Druadan is the singular and Druedain is the plural.
Right.
So they come from that same word Dru, woes, and Adan, man as a race, just like the Dun Adan or Dunedain, which is, the man of or men of the West.
Right, exactly. Now, coming back to Mary here, he's not sleeping well. I mean, he's exhausted from 4 days of hard riding, dealing with this increasing darkness that if you go back to the last set of episodes, the last chapter on the Siege of Gondor, we watched as that darkness increased and that started to weigh down Pippin's heart. Well, we're seeing that here with Mary. And once again, this gloom is affecting his emotional state.
I mean, we've seen the hobbits. I mean, all four of them, wherever they are, that they are on a journey that is, taking its tolls. It's no longer the beautiful days and the fun and entertaining days of, the Shire, but they have lost Gandalf. Mm-hmm. They have been kidnapped by Uruk-hai and, taken to Isengard and gone through a battle and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. So after, the one thing that always kept him, going forward was his best friend. And, he's simply no longer there. So, I mean, at this point, he's simply questioning his decision. Was it really a good idea to tag along against the king's personal wishes? Saying, I'm sorry, but I can't really use you. We can't put you on a horse or give you one. Right. Let's just not do it. And he asks himself, does he actually know that?
Should I maybe the king knows best. Maybe I shouldn't have come along. Yeah. So he does speculate, though, that the king probably doesn't know, right? He does notice that there's this understanding between Dernhelm and Elfhelm. Elfhelm's men ignore him completely, even if he talks, which has to be a lot of fun. Hey, everybody. Hello. I'm over here. And they're just like tuning him out completely. And Dernhelm's not talking at all. Totally silent for this entire 4-day road trip. That's rough. I mean, I'm thinking Pippin's road trip with Gandalf to Minas Tirith was rough.
Yeah,
but this is much rougher. Yeah,
I mean, like, imagine Mary going like, "Excuse me, could you pass me the spoon or the fork, please?" And everyone's like, oh, hello, have you heard the voice? No, I can't hear
I'm not hearing anything at all. I don't know what you're talking about.
And I mean, they're so tall, particularly the Rohirrim is always mentioned that they're really, really tall. So they would simply just, stare straight ahead, and Merry would be jumping up and down and go like, here, I'm here, look, listen. And they're like, no. It is kind of funny at the same time, but it's also, of course, sad. But that's probably how this has to be, because it is a secret. But it makes Merry obviously feel incredibly lonely. That's not the first time, that the hobbits, which were such a close-knit group, have been torn apart. So that is a very, very, very sad, and, he feels miserable.
He does.
Really.
He does, yeah.
And I mean, it's, it isn't the first time that he feels like this, and it's not the first time that he has it, but, Pippin has also been described as feeling lonely. It's just the hobbits miss their friends who've been, they've been friends for all of their lives and in their lives, and they shared all of those experiences did so until, only recently, and now they've been torn apart.
Forcibly separated, absolutely.
Yeah.
More than loneliness, Merry senses an anxiety, a heaviness, a worry sort of settling in as the Rohirrim approach danger. I mean, after all, they are now only a day's ride away from Minas Tirith.
Well, in the next part that, Alan has skipped, we learned that Merry is aware of some scouts that have been sent ahead on the road. But obviously some of them haven't made it back. So the danger is real, right?
Danger is very, very close. And those that did make it back said there is an entire army of the enemy camped on the road just a few miles to the west of the next hill, Amundine. Some of those men are as close as only 9 miles away. The text says 3 leagues. A league is 3 miles. So we're talking about 9 miles. That's fairly close when you're talking about armies this size.
All in between all of these things happening right now and the danger closing in, Théoden and Éomer have a council.
That's right. They've got to discuss their next steps. And we'll discuss our next steps right after the break. Now, before we get back to the text and the King's Council, we want to make sure you know that even after you've listened to this episode, there is a lot more going on at the Prancing Pony Podcast.
The PPP has an amazing listener community. They're always coming up with good questions, discussions across all our social media spaces. Check out our common room on Facebook, our dedicated subreddit, Twitter, and more.
Now, on Facebook, just look for the Prancing Pony Podcast. Follow the page to get the news and the episodes, but be sure to join the group to get involved in some great discussions.
Or if you prefer Reddit, find us there at r/PrancingPonyPod. On Twitter and Instagram, we're simply at PrancingPonyPod.
And we're also finally on TikTok at Prancing Pony Pod.
Congratulations! Yeah, there you go.
Much. Yeah, well, I finally decided to get off MySpace and join the, where all the hip people are. Yeah.
That's the speed we're looking for.
That's right. We're at Prancing Pony Pod there as well. So please follow me if we aren't already at 1,000. By the time this releases, I should be well past that. But just in case, get me to 1,000 so that I can start doing live events, especially with other Tolkien content creators. Finally, my all-new daily podcast, because I'm crazy apparently, Today's Tolkien Times, should be launching sometime in April.
Are you kidding me? You are launching another day?
Am I insane? Why?
Please do proceed.
Yeah, it is going to be a short form podcast, right? We're talking about 6 to 8 minutes a day, somewhere in that range. But it will also be on video. We're going to have it available as a traditional audio podcast for those of you who want to just get it via your RSS, your Apple Podcasts app or your Spotify or Amazon Music. But you can also be able to get it on video. Each day of the week is going to feature something different, from Mailbag Monday to Word Nerd Wednesday to Silmarillion Saturday. So join me on this new adventure and follow at Tolkien Times on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And you can also find it on Facebook at Today's Tolkien Times. So thank you. Now, folks, if you enjoy the PPP and the TTT and the PPP on TikTok and all these other things, please consider supporting the show by joining the Fellowship of the Podcast. When you do, you get a lot. You get an active Discord community, including live episode recordings, postscripts, ad-free episodes, and a lot more.
Like free merch and live Discord hangouts. But you can also become a part of our Questions After Nightfall episodes, or even join us as a guest in the North Wing. So please, Go to patreon.com/prancingponypod to show your support and join the fellowship of the podcast.
And of course, you can also help us out by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast and a rating on Spotify. Please don't forget to recommend us to your friends. For now, though, let's get back to the text. Marcel, would you go ahead and pick up where we left off?
Merry wanted somebody to talk to, and he thought of Pippin. But that only increased his restlessness. Poor Pippin, shut up in the great city of stone, lonely and afraid. Merry wished he was a tall rider like Éomer and could blow a horn or something and go galloping to his rescue. He sat up, listening to the drums that were beating again, now nearer at hand. Presently he heard voices speaking low, and he saw dim, half-shrouded lanterns passing through the trees. Men nearby began to move uncertainly in the dark. A tall figure loomed up and stumbled over him, cursing the tree roots. He recognized the voice of Elfhelm the Marshal. "I'm not a tree root, sir," he said, "nor a bag, but a bruised hobbit. The least you can do in amends is to tell me what is afoot." "Anything that can keep so in this devil's murk," answered Elfhelm. "But my lord sends word that we must set ourselves in readiness. Orders may come for a sudden move." "Is the enemy coming, then?" asked Merry anxiously. "Are those their drums? I began to think I was imagining them, as no one else seemed to take any notice of them." "Nay, nay," said Elfhelm. "The enemy is on the road, not in the hills. You hear the wozers, the wild men of the woods. Thus they talk together from afar. They still haunt Druadan forest, and it is said, remnants of an older time they be, living few and secretly, wild and wary as the beasts. They go not to war with Gondor or the Mark, but now they are troubled by the darkness and the coming of the orcs. They fear lest the dark years be returning, as seems likely enough. Let us be thankful that they are not hunting us, for they use poisoned arrows, it is said, and they are woodcrafty beyond compare. But they have offered their services to Théoden. Even now one of their headmen is being taken to the king. Yonder go the lights. So much I have heard, but no more. And now I must busy myself with my lord's commands. Pack yourself up, Master Bag." He vanished into the shadows.
Master Bag. I love that. So going back to the beginning of that passage, Merry is lonely, as we talked about before, right? He feels alone. And his thoughts, not surprisingly, turn to his friend Pippin explicitly, as opposed to before where we sort of infer that. Here we see that directly. And this isn't the first time. As we read in The Passing of the Grey Company, he missed Pippin and felt that he was only a burden.
And even in the very same chapter, but later on, he says, more than ever, he missed the unquenchable cheerfulness of Pippin.
That's right.
The thing is, what I find really funny, in a sense, kind of miserable as well, of course, is his name is Merry. I mean, he should be merry. He should be an innocent hobbit, just, having the time of his life. And obviously, he's not. Yeah. Rather than that being a source of comfort, thinking about Pippin just makes him want to do something. Yeah. And I love what he thinks is, doing things is blow a horn or ride a horse, and rescue him.
I love this sort of naivete, right? This total lack of understanding that Merry has here. Blow a horn or something and go galloping. He has no clue what it will take to rescue his friends. And frankly, I think that's beautiful. He just would do anything at this point. He wants to do something, but anything too. Yeah,
definitely. But that's, it really shows that the hobbits have obviously had so many experiences, most of them traumatic during their journey, but they really haven't, they haven't learned things.
No.
Really, how do you deal with war? How do you defend yourself? He doesn't really know how to, wield a sword or, shoot with a bow and arrow or,
certainly not ride a war horse into battle.
Most definitely. He has to be picked up, like a bag, over that horse. But it is lovely to see, which is so understandable for all of those hobbits. Yeah. They are there for their friends and they want to do something.
He would do anything. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And he's listening to the drums again, and then you notice that they're coming closer. And then he sees, he sees some people carrying lanterns and hears voices. So as any good hobbit, he gets curious about things.
That's right. And as usual, and we've been really like this since the beginning of the chapter, we're going into this new situation through the eyes of the least knowledgeable person present. Now, in book 4, that was Sam most of the time. When we're in Minas Tirith in this book, it's Pippin. When we were back in the Paths of the Dead, it was Gimli. But anytime we're here with the Rohirrim, it's almost always Merry, and it's his perspective because he knows the least, and that puts us in that same position.
It's just a beautiful technique that Tolkien is obviously using here and so many other different places in the story, because it draws us much more in. If I like Aragorn, but if I followed him all of the time and he looking down on smaller people or whatever, that I don't know, that wouldn't really work as well, because the hobbits are much closer to everyone's
They're
heart.
the everyman. Yeah, they really are.
But hobbits are obviously, I wouldn't say comic relief, but they really do it. So when he's wondering about those drums and lanterns and mysteries, Elfhelm stumbles over him, says, "Damn those roots!
Stupid roots! Can't believe I tripped over another root."
Yeah, and and it's really he proudly identifies himself as a bruised hobbit, which is quite different from both a bag or a tree root, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah, if we recall a moment ago, we read that Merry might have been just another bag that Dernhelm was carrying.
It really is. It harks back to other elements in the story, small passages. In the passing of the Great Company, he tells Aragorn that he doesn't want to be laid aside like baggage to be called for when all is over.
Right, exactly. Or even just a couple paragraphs after that line, we read that Merry felt more like unneeded baggage than ever. So it's a common thread for sure.
It really is a topic that we need, delve more deeply, into, because the whole baggage thing seems to be a huge thing for the smaller hobbits.
Well, if he would just be a frequent flyer, he wouldn't have to worry about fees for checked bags, and he could just stop making this a concern.
I mean, if he could ride any of those horses, but he's a halfling, so that doesn't really work. And they don't have they do have smaller ponies, but
the ponies can't keep up. They could not have Stibba. As Théoden said, this is not a ride for a pony like Stibba. Stibba would not have made it, right?
And but Merry is really, he's quick on the uptake, so he uses the opportunity, says, "Oh, okay, if you stumble over some, poor little hobbit, you can at least tell me what's going on." And Elfhelm goes, "Okay."
Yeah, he finally acknowledges he's there, doesn't he? He doesn't say, who's talking? I don't see anybody. There's no voice. I don't hear anyone.
I mean, his feet are still hurting because he just stumbled over a tree root, let's be honest. Yeah. But he says that Théoden has told the writers, be ready.
Yeah.
We could have the order of moving out at any moment. And Merry goes up, what is going on, right?
Right, exactly. And frankly, Merry follows that to its reasonable logical conclusion. Well, the enemy must be coming, right? Those drums I've been hearing, those must be from them, right?
Well, that's the thing. Elfhelm tells Merry, and obviously then, us, to us as the readers.
Exactly, through the lens of Merry, yep.
Exactly, about the Woses, the wild men of the woods. So there are a number of things that he's, sort of enumerating, and gives him sort of a list who these wild men are.
Yeah.
And, he tells him they communicate with each other over distances, using those drums.
Right.
They still haunt this forest, which is really interesting as a choice of words.
It really is, isn't it?
You would usually go for some evil spirit or maybe a demon that would haunt a forest, and not some really nice guy.
I think, we think about the superstitions, remember Éomer when he first encounters Aragorn, he has a similar, I don't think he uses the word haunt, but he certainly has a similar frame of mind when thinking about Lórien and Galadriel.
Oh, yes, true.
So it's the same thing. I think they're just suspicious of anything that's not them. They're a little insular in that regard, but so these people that are haunting this forest, the Woses, the wild men, they are remnants of an older time, Elfhelm explains. He says there aren't many of them, and they live secretly, but he expands on that. They're not just living secretly, like stealthy. They're living wildly like animals.
Well, lucky for them, they're obviously not at war with Gondor or Rohan. The darkness and the arrival of the orcs, obviously for them, is a concern.
Yeah.
And they do remember the Dark Years, which means that's the time when the men of this region worshipped Sauron before the coming of the men of Numenor. So that's a very long stretch of time that they can obviously remember. And the rumor is, it is said, that's a wonderful little piece that, somebody told me, I heard it from a friend, the cousin, over next door, blah, blah, blah.
My cousin's girlfriend's brother once said that he read on Twitter that somebody...
Actually, he said, they use poisoned arrows.
Yeah,
that's how I got to know about this. And they are incredibly woodcrafty.
Yes, they are. Now, here's the thing. Before we get any further into the Woses, I want to get this out of the way. There is a pretty uncomfortable noble savage thing going on here. This sort of idealized concept of uncivilized man, symbolizing the inherent goodness of somebody who's not exposed to the corrupting influence of civilization. And look, let's be fair, that sounds like a compliment, right? Hey, he's inherently good. He's unexposed to corruption. But there are some sort of, I don't know, colonialist or ethnocentric or even sometimes racist concepts that can be tied to this trope, this sort of noble savage idea. I do think that Tolkien does some very interesting things with this, but I have to admit it warrants a very thorough conversation, and we will be having bits of that conversation over the next couple of episodes. For example, when we get into this more after we're introduced to the wild men in full, we're going to see how Tolkien weaves it into the story and how he differentiates the narrator's view, let's say, from the way the Rohirrim seem to view these people, and certainly from how the Rohirrim apparently used to view them.
Yeah, definitely, Alan. It's one of those things that we have to keep in mind when, reading critically through the Lord of the Rings. So that the noble savage is a trope that's been going on for hundreds of years, and possibly the romanticism in the background as a literary inspiration or sources for Tolkien plays a part in it. But we're definitely going to talk about this in the next number of episodes. Yeah.
So, folks, as you think that we should talk about it, trust me, we will. It's just, most of it's going to be in next episode when we actually say goodbye to Khan Beri Khan, but some of it will be touched on tonight.
Well, for now, let's get back to the text. And it's Elfhelm telling Merry that one of the leaders of the wild men is being brought to Théoden.
Right.
And, Elfhelm has to go and be busy. And he tells, to pack himself up with a cheeky little comment, master the bag. It's really, it's a lovely nickname, because it's, there you go. But I'm sure that Merry appreciated it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he gives as good as he gets, right? I'm not a tree root. I'm not a bag. I'm a bruised hobbit. And obviously, Elfhelm can kind of rib him a little bit and call him Master Bag. The irony, of course, is that he's been traveling with a Master Baggins for a very long time. But
very much so.
Yeah. So if he liked that comment and got a snicker out of Elfhelm's little sarcasm or little snark, it's pretty clear that he didn't like the next bit. Now, that's the part that we actually had you skip, but it's also the part where we're talking about the poison arrows. And now I'm wanting to sing a 1980s song, Shoot That Poison Arrow Through My Heart.
I was waiting for it, and there is this allusion to 1980s music, and I am very, very content right now. Please proceed.
All right. Well, I'm glad that I have met your satisfaction. Now, it is worth mentioning here another footnote from Unfinished Tales. We're going to reference Unfinished Tales a lot over the next couple of weeks because there's so much about the Druidine in that work. Tolkien says specifically there that the Druidine had a law against the use of all poisons for the hurt of any living creatures, even those who had done them injury, save only orcs, whose poison darts they countered with others more deadly. So Merry didn't know this, but he had nothing to worry about.
See, the thing is, before we go back to the text, I really need to ask you one thing, Alan. Was there a reference to ABC?
Yes, that was.
I am so very happy. I will put out, later on I will pick up my vinyl and just play some other music because I like ABC a lot.
I think I might have that actual song on 45. I don't know that I have a record player anymore, but I have it on 45, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the ever-growing sense of dread coming from ABC to the ever-growing sense of dread, which is really, with that kind of music, it's the best thing.
Yeah, no doubt.
Now, it's what a lot of people may experience in a sort of a tiny way. If you're an athlete, if you're a sportsman, if you're going on stage, this unbearable waiting. That's something that we see Merry mention, think about on several occasions. It's if you get to do something, if you're finally off, if you are running, if you're playing the theater play, if you do all those things, or obviously if you're going to war, it's the waiting before the actual battle that is so nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
So what does he have? What is he doing? He gets up, he follows the lights because he's a hobbit, he's curious, he can't stop himself, and someone has to convey the next conversation to us.
That's right. But you're right about that waiting. I mean, you think back to Pippin, and twice we've seen him talk about the kind of the wait before the war. Like, this is the hardest part, is waiting for this thing to happen. And Merry is experiencing that same sort of sensation here, even if we're not reading the same words put to it.
True enough, Alan. Would you take us to the next paragraph then?
Presently, he came to an open space where a small tent had been set up for the king under a great tree. A large lantern, covered above, was hanging from a bough and cast a pale circle of light below. There sat Théoden and Éomer, and before them on the ground sat a strange squat shape of a man, gnarled as an old stone, and the hairs of his scanty beard straggled on his lumpy chin like dry moss. He was short-legged and fat-armed, thick and stumpy, and clad only with grass about his waist. Merry felt that he had seen him before somewhere, and suddenly he remembered the Pukkelmen of Dunharrow. Here was one of those old images brought to life, or maybe a creature descended in true line through endless years from the models used by the forgotten craftsmen long ago. There was a silence as Merry crept nearer, and then the wild man began to speak in answer to some question, it seemed. His voice was deep and guttural, yet to Merry's surprise he spoke the common speech, though in a halting fashion, and uncouth words were mingled with it.
"No, father of horsemen," he said. "We fight not, hunt only, kill Gorgun in woods, hate orc folk. You hate Gorgun too. We help as we can. Wild men have long ears and long eyes, know all paths. Wild men live here before stone houses, before tall men come up out of water."
"But our need is for aid in battle," said Éomer. "How will you and your folk help us?"
"Bring news," said the wild man. "We look out from hills, we climb big mountain and look down. Stone City is shut. Fire burns there outside, now inside too. You wish to come there? Then you must be quick. But Gorgun and men out of far away," he waved a short gnarled arm eastward, "sit on horse road. Very many, more than horsemen."
"How do you know that?" said Éomer. The old man's flat face and dark eyes showed nothing, but his voice was sullen with displeasure.
"Wild men are wild, free, but not children," he answered. "I am great headman, Khan Buri Khan. I count many things, stars in sky, leaves on trees, men in the dark. You have a score of scores, counted 10 times in 5. They have more, big fight, and who will win? And many more walk round walls of stone houses."
Here we go. That is a lovely voice there. And
I don't know how long I'll be able to do it.
Yeah, not easy to pronounce there. True.
No. And then, because he finally has mentioned his name, we should help everybody out. It is Khan Buri Khan. I mean, there's definitely, you've got to get that ch thing going with his name. So we'll probably just call him GBG just to make it easier to say as we're naming him during our discussion.
That is so nifty. That is such a great idea. GBG. I get the GBGBs. Wonderful. But it's again something that we've already mentioned before. It is again the perspective, from Merry. We see things through Merry. So he's really an eyewitness that, gives us all the information that we need. He arrives at this open area somewhere in the forest and except, that the troops have nothing. They're really sleeping on the ground, as you said, but the king has a small tent.
How do you know he's a king? Oh, he's got a tent.
That's very fine logic from you, Alan. Thank you very much there. You're lovely. Well, either there's a lantern in the tent, and that's where this meeting is, it's happening there. Or it might be that the lantern's just outside the tent, and that's where this meeting isn't happening. It's something you can't really quite tell, but Merry has to be really close.
Yeah, he's definitely very close. I'm not sure what it is, but whatever the case, Théoden and Éomer are seated along with this strange man, and that leads to another question. Are they seated on the ground like he is? Or are they seated in chairs? The fact that Tolkien mentions Théoden and Éomer first and only then says before them on the ground suggests that the stranger is the only one on the ground. But I got to say, my vote is that they're sitting on the ground as well. I feel like maybe out of a respect thing. I don't know, but it could go either way. Marcel, do you have an opinion? Do you have a thought on this?
Well, I would very much assume, with someone like Théoden, who, he's seen a few things in life, and he has definitely had his diplomatic discussions and, a meeting with other people to have, the kingdom run smoothly. He knows that to appreciate someone else who's different from you, has different cultural values, he will definitely adapt. So if Ram Buri Khan, all the Swiss listening, it's good for you. Thank you very much. Then he will definitely sit down. It's not like you have to understand. It's like they would be looking down on him, and in whatever culture you are, that is not good. Absolutely. That's not good. You would immediately adapt. And
Yeah,
and the fun
I think
thing
so
to
too.
me though is there is only one halfling in all of this, and nobody's kind of noticed him. I mean, would Khan Buri Khan not say, "Who is that?
Who is this
tiny
small person?"
little creature?" Yeah, true. But there you go. No,
He's
I
off in the shadows
definitely
somewhere.
believe. Yeah, I would definitely believe that they are sitting on the ground. Definitely.
I think so too. Might take him 10 minutes to get up. I mean, he is not a young man, but that's all right.
True. And it might also be, if we're not so sure about the lantern, it might just be that they're inside the tent having sat down, and having a chat to have middle of a private room. And Mary just, walks in a sense, or just is outside, the entrance.
by the door.
Looking in. Yeah, absolutely. And, he gives us this, the physical description of this wild man.
Right.
He has this strange squat shape that he's rough, knobbly or gnarled like a stone.
Love that. Yeah, and he has this thin, scraggly beard, which is described as being like dry moss. Short legs, thick arms. He's thickly built or stumpy. I'm trying not to feel called out. But he is wearing just a grass skirt, so I no longer feel like I identify here. But yeah, very different
Good
appearance.
for you. Good for everyone else, probably.
Yeah, very good
down
for
at the
everybody
beach.
else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think it's a good point to. There is a sort of lengthy physical description of these people, and that's once again, as I said before, Unfinished Tales, one of my favorite books.
Yes.
That's where all of these tiny little nuggets of information, these lovely details.
Oh, we got a lot of nuggets for you tonight, folks.
Absolutely. And if you want to learn more about these amazing folk, please read the chapter on the Druidine in Unfinished Tales. To be fair, let's be honest. Let's put it out there. Let us say it straight from the heart. We probably end up sharing much of it with you.
That's
here
true.
And in the Patreon postscripts to this. So, and next week's episodes. Yeah.
But it would be nice for you to read it on your own as well. But yeah, I think you'll probably get about half the content of that chapter in the next 2 weeks, especially if you get the postscripts as well.
Yeah.
So here's their physical description in that chapter. To the eyes of elves and other men, they were unlovely in looks. They were stumpy, some 4 foot high, but very broad, with heavy buttocks and short, thick legs. Their wide faces had deep-set eyes with heavy brows and flat noses, and grew no hair below their eyebrows, except in a few men who were proud of the distinction, a small tail of black hair in the midst of the chin. Their features were usually impassive, the most mobile being their wide mouths, and the movement of their wary eyes could not be observed save from close at hand, for they were so black that the pupils could not be distinguished. But in anger, they glowed red. Ooh, that's a cool feature.
That is a giveaway somewhere in the dark of the forest. Yeah, definitely.
All of a sudden, the red eyes are going, oh man, no, run away.
I think I'm trying to remember some animation film from the 50s or 60s where like bloop, 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 all those wolf
All the red
eyes,
eyes?
come up. Yeah.
Well, I think we also see some of that in Bakshi's Lord of the Rings with the orcs, because they all have red eyes.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. Yeah. We also get this. Their voices were deep and guttural, but their laughter was a surprise. It was rich and rolling, and set all who heard it, elves or men, laughing too, for its pure merriment, untainted by scorn or malice. In peace they often laughed at work or play when other men might sing, but they could be relentless enemies. And once aroused, their red wrath was slow to cool, showed no signs save the light in their eyes, for they fought in silence and did not exult in victory, not even over orcs, the only creatures for whom their hatred was implacable. The Eldar called them Druidine, admitting them to the rank of Atani, for they were much loved while they lasted.
I love that. I'm also made sad by what follows, which is that they didn't last long. That they were not a long-lived people.
Yes, absolutely.
But I want to go back to that bit about the rank of Atani. A quick reminder for folks, Atani was the Quenya name for men, but it was typically only used to refer to the men of the 3 houses of the Edain. Now, to be clear, also, Druidine was not their own name for themselves any more than wild men was their own name for themselves. They called themselves Drughu.
Which, turned into Dru, plural Druin in Sindarin, and the Adan part was added when the elves discovered they were enemies of the orcs, hence Druidine, or singular Druadan.
Yeah.
In Quenya, it's from Drugu we went to Ru and Ruatan, plural Ruatani.
Right. So now with that little aside on their names, we come back to the text, and looking at this strange man, Merry is reminded of the statues that he saw on the road up to Dunharrow, the Púcal men. Now this guy looks just like a statue that has been brought to life or a descendant of the model used by the original craftsman.
And again, we get information in Unfinished Tales that suggests that not only was the model for the Púcal man statue one of the Druidine, they were also likely the ones who created them.
Yes.
We read that the Druidine showed great talent for carving in wood or stone. They already had a knowledge of pigments derived chiefly from plants, and they drew pictures and patterns on wood or flat surfaces of stone. And sometimes they would scrape knobs of wood into faces that could be painted. But with sharper and stronger tools, they delighted in carving figures of men and beasts, whether toys or ornaments or large images, to which the most skilled among them could give vivid semblance of life.
I love that. Now, the passage continues, sometimes these images were strange and fantastic, or even fearful. Among the grim jests to which they put their skill was the making of orc figures, which they set at the borders of the land, shaped as if fleeing from it, shrieking in terror. They made also images of themselves and placed them at the entrances to tracks or at turnings of woodland paths. These they called watchstones, of which the most notable were set near the crossings of Teglin, each representing a druidon, larger than the life, squatting heavily upon a dead orc. These figures served not merely as insults to their enemies, for the orcs feared them and believed them to be filled with the malice of the Oghor High, for so they named the druidine, and able to hold communication with them. I love that.
I love that image of, orc figures shrieking in terror, like, oh my god! And it's seeing those, really lifelike. You see like this orc panting for, oh my god, I gotta run, and
right. But I love that because it's going to make orcs see that and turn around like, I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to go there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically the Druidine finger in a sense.
Oh yeah, it's that's brilliant stuff.
Yeah. Well, if we come back, to the text.
Mm-hmm. For a little while, at least, right?
At least for a little while, of course. It's just an exception. No, Merry approaches, and he allows us not to just see him, but we can hear the conversation.
That's right.
That he is having with Théoden and Éomer. So we have, the spy in the midst of all this,
yes.
misery.
It's a great way for us to be able to witness the conversation. Once again, it's Tolkien and that epistemic regime giving us the perspective of somebody least knowledgeable.
And we definitely, lacking the universal translator. He has to speak in Westron.
He has no Babelfish,
of course.
Yeah.
No, that's not either. His voice is strange. He does not speak it well, which, of course, again, what we mentioned before, it does help to continue that trope of the noble savage who's not capable of speaking that foreign language fluently.
Yet we'll see in a little bit that it's certainly not due to lack of intelligence. And I think
definitely not. No,
that'll come out as being very clear. Now, as we listen in, the conversation starts with the wild men. He tells Théoden, the father of horsemen, that they will not fight. They're only going to hunt in the woods, but that they can also gather news and information. And I love the way he puts this. They have long ears and long eyes.
I like that.
Isn't that a great phrase?
Metaphor. Yeah. I mean, I have decent eyesight. I can listen pretty well, but long ears and the image that comes up immediately is really, really interesting. What a culture has, what has to represent to come up with such a metaphor. And, we get also another reminder. The wild men have been there a very, very, very long time.
Yes,
I mean, the Rohirrim are just kids on the timeline in comparison.
That's right. They are.
So they were there before the building, of Minas Tirith, before even the men from Númenor came. So that's where they are going back in time.
Well over 3,000 years. Yeah.
Which is a little bit of time.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a chunk of time. Yeah. So we also get, by the way, literally the only word in their native language in the entirety of the Legendarium. Gorgun, and it's the orcs.
And again, it's always, of course, a question of preference and of taste, but Tolkien manages to get a word that really sounds incredibly not very sympathetic.
Unpleasant. Yeah, it's sort of that aesthetic sensibility. I can't think of
Gorgun.
Burarum, right? I think of Treebeard.
Yeah.
And that sort of aesthetic sensibility, it makes some more sense when you remember that one of the words for the orcs is Glamhoth, which means the din horde or the loud horde.
Oh, you can hear them. Yes, they will make so much noise, and they will trample things underneath their feet, living plants and everything. Yeah.
And so it's going to be aesthetically unpleasant. Yeah, I love it.
And it's really interesting to see that is one of the points. I mean, Éomer usually is the good guy, but at this point, you can see that he has this, which is, of course, all together with a noble savage trope, is a question of prejudice.
Yeah.
And he questions, he questions their ability. You know, if you don't want to fight, if you're not a warrior, what can you do for us? How can you
possibly help us? Right.
True.
And that's when the wild man makes, frankly, the very valid point that intelligence gathering is helpful.
Yeah. There is a cliff behind that road.
Right. And by the way, let me give you an example of that intelligence gathering. The city is shut and on fire.
No, that's just a tiny little detail we don't really know anything about. Yeah. And not only that, but he also gives them the disposition of enemy forces. You know, a large force of orcs, and men are camped out on the road. There are more than there are of the Rohirrim. So he gives them a very, very, very decisive clue. Don't take the road.
That's right. We call this actionable intelligence. This is good stuff. But that leads to a question, and you observed earlier sort of Éomer's prejudice here, to a question from him that honestly I cringe at every time I read it. I mean, the implication is that Khan Buri Khan is so primitive that he couldn't possibly count that high. I mean, how do you count to anything above 20? You've only got your 10 toes and 10 fingers, you idiot. It's this implication that because he's not of a culture, right, that his lack of civilization somehow means a lack of intelligence.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the very, very, very few moments where, Éomer gets, not all those bonus points.
Yeah, that's true. He does get dinged here a little bit. Yeah.
Definitely. But what I love about Tolkien is, he has that wild man, come right back at him with his response, and then very, very clearly, no movement, no, you can't see anything, but the tone in the voice. Every good teacher can do this. You don't have to change anything, but it's
every good parent can do this too. Let me tell you. Yeah.
There you go. That's, some people from experience, other people will get it, through studies, but it's, when he says we are wild, free, but not children.
That's right.
So, it's basically, again, I already mentioned the GBG finger. So that's another one. It's like, don't patronize me. Don't think, I'm stupid, right?
Exactly. Absolutely. In fact, I am the leader of my people. I am the son of a leader of my people. This is a good time for me to explain that Khan Buri Khan simply means Khan, son of Khan. And we learn that, by the way, in Parma Eldalamberon number 17. Words and phrases in Lord of the Rings.
So grateful for Parma Eldalamberon to give us Khan, son of Khan. I think it's one of those little cute jokes that, Tolkien was just writing this stuff. Then he was sniggering all the time. Khan, son of Khan. Isn't that funny?
I'm going to make people say Khan more than once.
And I so love him, imagining him sitting at the table. It's late in the night. He's worked all day. He's got family and kids, so many things to do. And then he's, sort of stole an hour or two to write stuff. And then he sits at his table and writes this.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Now, I hate to mix fandoms here. I don't hate to mix fandoms. It's actually something I do all the time. But I'm wondering, did Khan shoot first?
Oh man, that's a capital ouch with 3 exclamation marks. Alan, be ashamed.
I am. All right. Sorry about that. We'll go back to the story, folks.
I'm still trying to figure out where Khan, son of Khan, will I know put in, but there you go. Well, he goes on to talk about all those things. He counts.
Yeah.
Stars in the sky and leaves on trees.
Very large numbers.
Did you, young man, did you count all of them? Show me something that you've got.
I can count to exponents, man. I know how to count. And he also can count men in the dark. I love that. I mean, he's clearly sort of emphasizing his ability, sort of beyond that of maybe a normal person, because of maybe increased ability of sight, right? When we're long eyes and long ears.
Absolutely, yes.
Suggests maybe that he does have this ability. So he gives a very accurate counting of the Rohirrim here. He says, score of scores, so that's going to be 20 times 20, counted 10 times and 5. So it's 20 times 20 times 15. That gets you 6,000. Precisely the 6,000 spears to Sunlanding that we read about 2 chapters ago. He got their numbers spot on.
And I really love this, that there is a culture, obviously, who is counting differently. There's these tiny little elements that Tolkien, weaves into the story that will tell you, obviously, they think differently because they count differently. But,
Absolutely.
One of the things is that I love about French is, for example, 97, it's 97, but it actually means 4 multiplied by 20 plus 10 and 7.
Yeah.
So you have, they count those things a little bit differently, but it's the French. They're a different culture. They're allowed to do so, obviously.
Oui.
Counting like that, you have to trust him. When he says that Sauron's force on the road has more. And an even larger force is surrounding Minas Tirith as we're speaking.
So now we're talking about some huge numbers, right? I mean, so if there's a force on the road that has more, we're talking about probably 8,000 to 10,000 strong, and an even larger force of 10,000 to 15,000 surrounding Minas Tirith. We're talking big numbers at this point. This is where I think we start to see, at least from the narrator's perspective, a crack in that noble savage trope. I'm not saying that it all of a sudden makes it all better. Okay, please don't misinterpret me. What I'm saying is that I think Tolkien presents him like this traditional noble savage in many ways. The appearance, the drums, the grass skirt, the poison arrows, it all feeds into that sort of trope, especially the speech patterns, which is probably for me the hardest part. I even have a hard time sort of reading the text out loud because I feel like I'm feeding into that, and I don't want to, right? It's a little awkward to do that. But then we see, I think, that it's the Rohirrim, or at least Éomer, who views Khan Buri Khan as less than. Tolkien himself, as we'll see later, has a higher view of them. Now, like I said before, does that make it not troubling? Oh, not at all. Is it still troubling? I think so. But we're going to talk more next week when we bid farewell to Khan Buri Khan. It's really
an interesting thing to see how, if you talk about the noble savage trope, it's all about, how does prejudice work?
Yes.
How do we, in the very sense of the word, judge people without actually knowing anything about them?
Prejudge, right.
But if we're not going too much into this topic right now, but the thing is, Tolkien obviously knew, even at his time, even, with all the isms that we can talk about here, is that prejudice has been around for as long as we can think or write, or we have archaeological evidence. So he already knows that people who judge you wrongly without knowing anything about you, that's not a good thing. So that's the little bit there where he's getting back.
That's a very good
Éomer.
point, because he does, exactly. He uses Éomer's misspeech here. He uses Éomer's misstep as a way of pointing out that this is wrong. He really has Khan Buri Khan put the smackdown on him for it. Yeah.
And that's it. I mean, Tolkien really illustrates it really clearly for the reader that even a good guy, where would you expect that he's doing all the right things, that he can have backwards ideas, assume that an indigenous person is simple like a child.
Exactly. Now, it may also be worth observing that from his notes, Christopher Tolkien is able to conclude that it was my father's intention ultimately to transform Sador, the old serving man in Hurin's house in Dor-lómin, into a Droog. And I think that speaks to the point that Tolkien thinks highly of them, as I believe we'll see next week. Anybody who's read the story, the Children of Hurin, and understands who Sador is, would see that Tolkien viewed him, in a positive light. So, but I'm going to go ahead and get back to the text. And in fact, Marcel, it's your turn. If you could pick up where I left off, that would be great.
Absolutely. Alas, he speaks all too shrewdly, said Théoden. And our scouts say that they have cast trenches, stakes across the road. We cannot sweep them away in sudden onset. And yet we need great haste, said Éomer. Mundburg is on fire. Let Khan Buri Khan finish, said the wild man. More than one road, he knows. He will lead you by a road where no pits are, no Gorgun walk, only wild men and beasts. Many paths were made when Stoners folk were stronger. They carved hills as hunters carve beast flesh. Wild men think they ate stone for food. They went through Druadan to Rimmon with great wains. They go no longer. Road is forgotten, but not by wild men. Over hill and behind hill it lies still under grass and tree. There behind to Rimmon, down to Din, and back at the end to Horseman's Road. Wild men will show you that road. Then you will kill Gorgun, and drive away bad dark with bright iron. and wild men can go back to sleep in the wild woods. Éomer and the king spoke together in their own tongue. At length, Théoden turned to the wild men. "We will receive your offer," he said. "For though we leave a host of foes behind, what matter? If the stone falls, then we shall have no returning. If it is saved, then the orc host itself will be cut off. If you are faithful, Ghân Buirí Ghân, then we will give you rich reward, and you shall have the friendship of the mark forever." "Dead men are no friends to living men, and give them no gifts," said the wild man. "But if you live after the darkness, then leave wild men alone in the woods. Do not hunt them like beasts anymore. Ghân Buirí Ghân will not lead you into trap. He will go himself with father of horsemen, and if he leads you wrong, you will kill him." "So be it," said Théoden.
All right. So after Éomer's insulting question and GBG's smackdown response, Théoden speaks, right? He acknowledges that the wild man shows that he is astute, right? He's shrewd. Shrewd means in a way that shows sharp powers of judgment or astutely. So clearly, Ghân Buirí Ghân knows what he's talking about.
We talked about our spy network, our Druad
Yep.
spy network, and the thing is, it's worse than just the numbers. The enemy have dug trenches, they put stakes across the road, so the effective cavalry charge, which is the main weapon of the Rohirrim army, that won't work
It's
at
not
all.
going to happen.
And so Éomer is in a hurry, and rightly so, one might say.
City's on fire, man. But I have to say, this is another example of Tolkien giving Ghân Buirí Ghân some agency and a sense of, again, equality rather than allowing himself to be run over. He is not pleased by the interruption. He demands to be allowed to finish. Let Ghân Buirí Ghân finish. I like that. And he explains there is a way around the orcs.
The thing is exactly that, it's not only that they know about the situation in, all surrounding the Druadan forest and how the enemy is positioned, but he also remembers, because they have been there for such a long time, he actually say when they were stronger, so they can actually judge that Gondor was a much, much mightier power. So he definitely has, I wouldn't really immediately say political sense of the situation, but he could definitely count how many soldiers Gondor had.
Certainly, certainly a historical sense. He understands that Gondor now is not Gondor then. Yeah.
Yeah, and he obviously remembers, or through the memory of his people, he remembers there's a path made back in the beginnings of Gondor when they were stronger.
When they were stronger, right? Exactly. And the way this is described is interesting, though. They carved hills as hunters carve beast flesh, and the wild men even concluded that the Gondorians must literally have eaten stone for food. Now, I wonder, is he being, I don't know, is this some sort of a metaphor? Is this just an example of hyperbole? Or did they literally think these people were eating stone?
At one or two points during the talk, the council they're holding, I think that the wild man is pulling their legs a little.
I think so.
I think so. He's obviously a very, very intelligent person, and has a very sound judgment. He sees all the consequences of what is going on, and that they are playing an immensely important part in the strategy of saving that city, which is on fire and surrounded by thousands of enemies. And the whole eating stone like food plays a bit into Éomer would think that, so it's like, I'm going to tell him this. It's a bit like one of those Indiana Jones movies. Eat the eyeballs because that's what we have as soup. That's a natural thing. And you go like, yes, okay, I'm going to eat the eyeball. And it's just a trick. They're making, I think he's in a sense making fun of them. But true enough, if you looked at what Gondor achieved architecturally, what they built in such a short amount of time, it must have looked like they'd simply ate like huge, stone eating. It's not a troll, but stone-eating monsters.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you think about the phrase that we use all the time on the show, Eöl ente Jöwerk, the ancient work of giants, that's very much what this looks like, right? I mean, because remember, it's not just that they built Minas Tirith. They also built Helm's Deep. They built Isengard. Okay, Orthank's a different story, right? The whole
true,
but the walls of Isengard certainly were built by Gondor. And we know, of course, that Helm's Deep was as well. And there are other fortifications and things that the men of Gondor, the men of Numenor would have built back in the day.
And, it could just be another really subtly, cleverly, put in detail and hint at that particular line, that Tolkien kind of snuck it in again in the work of giants. It's probably we should simply read the Lord of the Rings with all of the elements where it could possibly say that's the work of giants. This is huge. This is huge. This is huge. They're eating, stone-like food. It's all,
Exactly. It fits that. Mm-hmm.
The thing is, he also mentioned that this road went through the forest to Rimmon. And he says it again, that the road goes behind Rimmon and down to Dean.
And that's the thing. There is definitely a mix-up here. We know that the beacons go in order from Minas Tirith. So we're going, that's going to be east to west. Amondine, Elanach, Nardal, Eralas, and then Min Rimmon, Calenhad, and Halafirion. Min Rimmon is actually about 75 miles west of where the Rohirrim currently are.
Yeah, Hammond and Skull in their research, they obviously have acknowledged this confusion and explained that it's possible, given Tolkien's deliberation over Rimmon, that he did indeed intend to extend the road considerably further west, in which case there behind Rimmon should probably be there behind Elenach. But it's more likely that both instances are, as they say, in error.
Exactly. And they go on to point out that it may be significant that in Tolkien's late Rivers and Beacon Hills of Gondar, which, by the way, folks, is an essay you can read in full in The Nature of Middle-earth, Tolkien says that Nardal, quote, was on the end of a high ridge, originally part of the Druadan forest, but long deprived of trees by masons and quarriers who came up the Stonewain Valley. Nardal was manned by a guard who also protected the quarries.
And Hammond and Skull concede that if this letter piece is accurate, the text should probably read through Druadan to Nardoth, there behind Elenach.
Yeah.
Still, they say they couldn't be certain of Tolkien's intent here. That's the point. It's really difficult to discern in this particular case. So they left the text unaltered when they edited the 2004 revised text.
Exactly. Speaking of the text, let's get back to it. GBG says he'll show the Rohirrim that road and that they can kill the orcs and drive away the darkness so that his people, the wild men, can return to their lives, right? To sleeping safely in the forests. And that's when Théoden and Éomer speak with each other. Now, for a moment, why are they speaking their own language? Well, of course, because they're discussing strategy here and deciding whether or not they're going to take this offer. But they exclude not only GBG, they also exclude Merry when they do that. And by extension, they're excluding us as the readers. So I think this is a really well done moment. But then the king turns to Khan Beri-Khan and accepts his offer.
And I really like this, that from Théoden that we first met in Edoras, this helpless aged man, bowed by the pressure from Saruman and from Grima and all those infiltrations and the lies that he, put into his mind. And he's now back again. He's the active thinking, rationalizing, strategizing king and leader of his people. And his reasoning is pretty, it's pretty simple and pretty sound, I think.
Yeah.
Even if we leave the orcs behind us, what's the point? If Minas Tirith falls, we won't stand a chance anyway. So, but if we help save the city, then the orcs will be cut off from any reinforcement. And that's obviously the huge advantage.
Yeah. And one suspects they probably don't have trenches and stakes going that direction. So if we can come around and flank them and take them from their rear, then, we do have a chance. And that's when Théoden offers a price to Khan Beri-Khan. If you remain faithful, right? If what you've said is true and you do what you say you're going to do, we're going to give you a reward and you'll be our friends forever. BFFs, man. BFFs.
Absolutely. But again, that's another point where, we can see that GBG not really pulling their legs, but he's showing them, I can hold with the best, it's pretty easy because that, you can't be friends with people who are dead. It's like, it's like slam. It's like, listen, if you lose, right, boys, if you lose, then what are you telling me? I'm not going to get any gifts from you either. So, that's the biggest slap in all of this sort of passage with them. It's like, you can promise me $1 million, but if you're dead, who's going to sign the check, eh?
Right. Exactly. And that's when he proposes a counteroffer that's pretty terrifying when you think it through. If you live, then just leave us alone and, hey man, wow, don't hunt us like animals anymore.
And that is the exact point. That is, up until now, we only thought like Éomer might just have, might be biased and,
right, a little
and
prejudice.
He has his prejudices and he doesn't really know anything, but that's a really, really terrifying prospect.
It is.
That the Rohirrim once may have hunted the wild men for sport as though they were animals. that is GBG is like the coolest guy ever. I'm really sorry to say this, but your people once literally hunted my people, but I'm sitting here quite relaxed and I'm going to save you. I'm the bigger guy.
He really is.
Yeah.
I can only hope that this is something that's more in like his ancestral memory, like a cultural history memory and not recent living memory. There's nothing that gives us a sense one way or the other. But this puts me in mind of Mime and the petty dwarfs. And we read about that in the Children of Hurin,
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, there's the narrative there that says, before the dwarves of Nogrod and Belagost came west over the mountains, the elves of Beleriand knew not what these others were, and they hunted them and slew them. But afterwards they let them alone, and they were called Noigith Nibin, the petty dwarves.
It's really, it really reminds everyone who reads that particular passage to the other one. It's, and the question really is, did the man of Rohan know that these were a people and not beasts when they still hunted them? I mean, obviously the elves giving them the name, making them
once
a
they figured it out,
but because the Rohirrim obviously don't have that long a memory, that they have no cultural connections to them because they came from the north, came to Caranavdon, turned into Rohan, and they just found them there and didn't know who they were or what they were.
Right.
And I don't know, probably because they got Rohan and Gondor was quite happy and they had a little bit of interaction, but they never really asked anyone who was the expert on the Druadan, on the Druidine. Right. So I'm not really sure. I don't think there really is an answer to that, and I don't want to believe that Éomer and Théoden would, ride out from Edoras and go some Druidine
hunting the wild men. Yeah,
I don't really think so. But there must have been a time.
Seems out of character, but yeah.
When the Dunlandings, for example, might have been driven out in the west, they may have been thinking, there are some other people or whatever they are, and we have to get rid of them as well. So, to have the boundaries clear and, have it all, country for us.
It is troubling either way, whether we're talking about 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, or they're talking about 50 years ago. I mean, clearly it's my hope, and the text doesn't give us an answer either way, that this is something that's in their more ancient history. But still, it's shall we say, a valid request. Please don't hunt us anymore. Okay, deal.
Yep, very good.
And Han says, I'll accompany you myself. If I lead you wrong, you can kill me.
I think that is the soundest offer, that you can possibly get from the great headman. I mean, he is a leader of his people.
He is.
And he is telling them, I can offer you a solution. And thank God, Théoden is wise enough. And, he obviously accepts the offer.
Yeah, clearly.
Well, the thing is, it's been quite a while since we've read some text. Would you like to do something?
I'll go ahead and do that.
Alan, thank you.
How long will it take to pass by the enemy and come back to the road? Asked Éomer. We must go at foot pace if you guide us, and I doubt not the way is narrow. Wild men go quick on feet, said Ghân. Way is wide for 4 horses in Stonewain Valley yonder.
He waved his hand southwards.
But narrow at beginning and at end. Wild man could walk from here to Dean between sunrise and noon.
Then we must allow at least 7 hours for the leaders, said Éomer. But we must reckon rather on some 10 hours for all. Things unforeseen may hinder us, and if our host is all strung out, it will be long ere it can be set in order when we issue from the hills. What is the hour now?
Who knows, said Théoden. All is night now. It is all dark, but it is not all night, said Ghân. When sun comes, we feel her, even when she is hidden. Already she climbs over east mountains. It is the opening of day in the sky fields.
Then we must set out as soon as may be, said Éomer. Even so, we cannot hope to come to Gondor's aid today. Merry waited to hear no more, but slipped away to get ready for the summons to the march. This was the last stage before the battle. It did not seem likely to him that many of them would survive it, but he thought of Pippin and the flames in Minas Tirith and thrust down his own dread.
And again, it's really interesting how Tolkien uses the character, how he uses Merry to go into the scene, how he listens to him having some eyewitness. And then, now that things are decided, now that the things are put in motion, he makes himself, he's going to be, make himself ready for this coming next. And, Éomer, obviously, he wants to know more of the information. You see how quickly he switched from, well, he doesn't really, he's not quite capable of counting, but he's realized his mistake now. And he's simply asking for the information because he knows he is offering him really good, reliable, strategically important information. How much longer will this road take? We are 6,000 men on horseback. We have to travel at walking pace on a narrow road. How much will it take us?
Yeah. So he's asking for operational information here, and it's something that, Khan Beri-Khan is able to provide. He says it's a half-day walk, sunrise to noon. And yes, it's narrow at the beginning and end, but it's wide enough for 4 people to ride across the road through the valley itself.
And that's a really, really good question. You have the bottleneck situation at the beginning and at the end. So it'd be nice to ride 4 wide, but you can't really do it. So you have to squeeze in, and particularly like when you're coming out, Éomer rightly suggests it's like a 7-hour target for the leaders, but another 3 hours to get the rest of the riders through. If you have a huge and very long
6,000
parade,
riders,
that will take some time to pass you by. Just imagine, go to old school Soviet, military parades. They take their time.
I mean, you think about it, if it's only 4 across, that means it's a column that's got 1,500 lines of 4 riders. That's a long, long line.
Yes, absolutely.
I could sit here and do the math about how long that's going to be from head to tail, but it's going to be really, really long.
And I really like, he says he doesn't really know what time it is, and Théoden doesn't know either because it's dark. And, what does GBG do?
Well, in tune with nature, which again does feed into the noble savage trope, but it is also very importantly when it comes to Tolkien, something that we always see as a positive in the Legendarium. So he points out that darkness isn't the same thing as night. And he's right. The sun is rising. It is actually morning.
That's basically the horn call. It's time to set out as soon as possible. That would mean they would be getting back onto the road after sunset on that same day, which in turn means they won't be able to come to Gondor's aid on this very day. Correct.
So we've returned to Merry's perspective in time to see him leave, as you mentioned earlier. He knows he has to be ready to march very, very soon.
It's really interesting to see that Merry at this point, he actually thinks ahead. Some other people would stay there and, try to listen in. Maybe there's something else come, but he's ready, mentally, emotionally, it's last steps before the big fight. And the judgment that this tiny, naive, innocent, hobbit comes to, it's not many will survive it.
No, he knows it.
But at the same time, again, that what is so, charming and wonderful and really, really positive about hobbits is he thinks, just as he did at the beginning of the chapter, he thinks of the others. He thinks of Pippin. He thinks of him being administrative all alone. And that is fellowship.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And the quick line, folks, don't miss this. He thrust down his own dread. This is his determination, his strength of will. This is his volition overcoming his emotion. And it is powerful here, and it's definitely something to note. But we're going to go ahead and have you wrap up the last reading for this episode, Marcel, if you pick up about halfway through the next paragraph.
Each company was guided by a wild woodman, but old Khan walked beside the king. The start had been slower than was hoped, for it had taken time for the riders, walking and leading their horses, to find paths over the thickly wooded ridges behind their camp and down into the hidden Stonewain Valley. It was late in the afternoon when the leaders came to wide grey thickets stretching beyond the eastward side of Amondine and masking a great gap in the line of hills that from Nardal to Dean ran east and west. Through the gap, the forgotten Wain Road long ago had run down, back into the main horseway from the city, through Anorion, but now for many lives of men, trees had had their way with it, and it had vanished, broken and buried under the leaves of uncounted years. But the thickets offered to riders their last hope of cover before they went into open battle. For beyond them lay the road and the plains of Anduin, while east and southward the slopes were bare and rocky, as the writhen hills gathered themselves together and climbed up bastion upon bastion into the great mass and shoulders of Mindolluin. The leading company was halted, and as those behind filed up out of the trough of the Stonewain Valley, they spread out and passed to camping places under the grey trees. The king summoned the captains to council. Éomer sent out scouts to spy upon the road, But old Ghân shook his head. "No good to send horsemen," he said. "Wild men have already seen all that can be seen in the bad air. They will come and so speak to me here."
So first, going back to the part that I had you skip, we see a bit more about the Wildmen, right? They know what they're doing. Again, we see this intelligence and awareness, and that they're certainly the equal of the Rohirrim here. They're setting a screen of hunters that prevents anybody from discovering the moving army of riders in the hills. And then we also note that the darkness is continuing to grow as they get closer to the city.
And what I really like, by now the relationship between those three has changed a little bit. Éomer is on the way of sending out scouts, and Ghân just says, come back, don't do it. It's just, it's a waste of time.
There's no point.
We got this.
Except it turns out that it's a good thing he did, but we'll get to that next week. So anyway.
Sure. Each of the company, each of the J.R.R. was led by one of the Wildmen, but Ghân is walking next to Théoden, referred to without his patronymic son of Ghân.
In the text, it's just Ghân now and not Ghân Ghân. Yeah.
For the most part, definitely, yeah.
Yeah. Now, it takes time for the riders to find their way over the ridges and down into the Stonewain Valley. In nomenclature, by the way, Tolkien says that this is the common speech name of the long, narrow defile along which the wains, sleds or drays, passed to and fro from the stone quarries.
And in the unfinished index, he says it's a translation of Imrath Gondraith, and explains that Imrath means a long, narrow valley with road or watercourse running lengthwise.
There you go.
Imagine, it has to be a road or watercourse running lengthwise, not sideways or anything. It's like exactly
if it crosses, it's not the same, right?
You have to be exact with words. What a surprise for J.R.R.
I'm shocked.
Tolkien.
I'm shocked. This is my shocked face. Yeah.
It's a hat tip to Hammond and Skull for pointing both of these out in their Reader's Companion.
Absolutely. So we get back to the text. It's already late afternoon when they get to a stretch of thickets that are on the east side of Amondine, and they screen them off from where this road runs down into the main road. So it's a great place to sort of gather the forces, because past these thickets is the road and the plains of Anduin.
I love this description of those foothills. It's just
yes.
The riven hills gathered themselves together and climbed up bastion upon bastion into the great mass and shoulders of Mindolluin.
That just gives me chills.
It is, again, it's, the alliterative verse that is sort of always hidden, in some of the lines where you read it out aloud to someone. And it's really melodic,
It is. There's a musicality to this. And I also love sort of the imagery of the hills themselves being active in this process, right? They're writhen, they gather themselves, they climb up. The hills themselves are doing this. And I also want to chat a second about this word writhen, right? We all know the verb to writhe. But until Tolkien, I have to say, I didn't know you could use it as an adjective. It's great. I love it. Writhen. But it isn't the first time we've seen it in The Lord of the Rings. It's actually the third. You've got one. I've got one. In Book 2, Chapter 9, The Great River, it's when we first come across it. And we probably had a similar conversation, Sean and I, when we read about the high ridges crowned with wind-writhen firs.
I think it's really important, and it's one of my pet, peeves or projects, so to speak. We have to bring some of the words back that Tolkien has been using in all of his writings. Next time you get a delivery, you will say to the guy, "Oh, that package is rhythm. I will not accept it because it's not okay anymore. Please take it back."
It's rhythm. It's twisted. It's
Yeah, there you go. No, I love that Tolkien brings these little wonderful linguistic elements into the story. Yeah. I mean, it's in Book 3 in Chapter 11, the Palantir, we read about a spreading hawthorn, tall as a tree, writhen with age, but hale in every limb. It's just, it's a really cool word that we definitely had to call out.
Oh, we absolutely did. Now, everybody stops behind this last bit of cover, and they all camp quickly while the king and captains hold their last council. You want to tell us what happens there?
I love this. Éomer is, I mentioned it already, but it's so beautiful in that scene. Éomer is like, "Oh, okay, no, I'm the, marshal of the mark, blah, blah. I have to do these things. I have to send out scouts." Ghân just shakes his head like, "Oh, come on, son. Really? Are you going to make that simple mistake? Really? It's so easy." And we've already seen all that can be seen. And that's another smackdown.
Now, in terms of general layout and the approach, he's absolutely right. We'll find out next week that it's a good thing he sends out scouts because they find a little detail that we will talk about then. and it has to do with the Red Arrow. But that's for next week. For now, Ghân says it's no good to send horsemen. I suppose that means it's also no good to send barleymen. Marcel, what does barleyman have in the mailbag for us tonight?
Oh, well, Gabriel P. writes in saying, reflecting on the wars of the Second and Third Ages, I began to wonder about the name War of the Ring. Do you think that the common people of Middle-earth later knew this war as the War of the Ring? Did they even know there was a ring? The War of the Last Alliance, that's probably known well that way because it was, the last alliance between men and elves. What do you think, Alan?
Well, Gabriel, that is a reasonable question. I mean, names for historical events often develop after the event, right? I mean, sometimes long after the event. World War I, what we know of as World War I, that is, was known as the Great War all the way until 1939, when, after the outbreak of yet another global conflict, there had to be a way to identify them numerically. But even then, after the outbreak of what we now call World War II wasn't called that either. In England, it was just the war. And in the U.S., it was mostly referred to as the war in Europe. It wasn't called the Second World War until FDR called it that in 1941. So yes, it is unlikely that during the actual war, the common folk would have called it the War of the Ring. At the same time, that may hold true for what we know as the War of the Last Alliance, which is sometimes referred to simply as the War of the Alliance. I mean, only after the death of High King Gil-galad and the eventual splintering of the forces of men did it become clear that no subsequent alliance could ever match that one.
It's not that any alliance could have matched one. I mean, the text makes it really quite clear in the chapter called Of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. Now Elendil and Gil-galad took counsel together, for they perceived that Sauron would grow too strong and would overcome all his enemies one by one, if they did not unite against him. Therefore they made that league which is called the Last Alliance, and they marched east into Middle-earth, gathering a great host of elves and men, and they halted for a while at Inladris. It is said that the host that was there assembled was fairer and more splendid in arms than any has since been seen in Middle-earth, and none greater has been mustered since the host of the Valar went against Thangorodrim.
Okay, so even if it was called the Last Alliance at the time, and I do have to point this out, the text sounds like that, but it isn't 100% clear because it says that league which is called the Last Alliance, not that league which was called the Last Alliance. So again, we're talking about a text that's looking back at a historical event, so it may be naming it now what it wasn't called then. The whole point then was it was in the context of their last chance, the last massive gathering. I mean, after all, the Noldor knew it was time to go back. So when it comes to the War of the Ring, the fact is we really only have names of events and battles. We have the battles of the Fords of Isen, the Battle of Isengard, the Battle of the Hornburg, assaults on Lothlorien, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, the Siege of Gondor, the Battle of the Morannon, the Battle of Dale, and the Battle of Bywater. Now, with all that said, there is a place where it's called the War of the Ring contemporaneously instead of historically, and that's in the text in Book 2, Chapter 1, Many Meetings. Gandalf is explaining to Frodo who Strider really is, and he says,
"But there are few left in Middle-earth like Aragorn, son of Arathorn. The race of the kings from over the sea is nearly at an end. It may be that this War of the Ring will be their last adventure."
We also get a reference to it as the War of the Ring at the very end of the story, in the chapter, The Grey Havens. And we read the title page had many titles on it, crossed out one after another. So, and then goes on, to list several of those titles, some of which you will be familiar with, There and Back Again, for instance, or The Tale of the Great Ring. But one of the scratched out titles is What We Did in the War of the Ring, which, is always going to be more interesting as a, as a school project that what we did on summer vacation. But,
it does sort of have that ring, right? What we did in the War of the Ring. What'd you do in the War of the Ring?
But I digress.
I went on vacation.
I have to do that as well.
But I digress. It is your job now, actually. For 3 episodes, you have to digress.
Here you go.
So I guess the fact is we don't know for sure how widespread it was called the War of the Ring, but we do know that it was called that by Gandalf early on, and that the title, whether that was Frodo's writing, for instance, he crossed it out as a potential title, he also called it the War of the Ring. But do we know how widespread that was? No. We really don't. But I at least we know it was called that contemporaneously by at least two people. So there you have it. Folks, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. But be sure to join us again next week when Khan's weather prediction is encouraging.
Good weather is always welcome. Folks, Alan and I want to thank the members of Team PPP. Editor Jordan Reynolds, Barlaman Becca Davis, Social Media Manager Casey Hilsey, Event and Patron Community Coordinator Katie McKenna, Graphic Artist Megan Collins, and Website Guru Phil Dean.
Speaking of the website, please be sure to give us a visit there at theprancingponypodcast.com. We've got show notes, hilarious outtakes, Prancing Pony ponderings, and of course our online storefront where you can get all sorts of PPP merch, including stuff with all the cool new chapter art that we've been featuring this season.
You'll also want to visit our library page. The Prancing Pony Podcast is first and foremost a podcast about the books. So if you are interested in a book we've mentioned on the show, you'll find a link for it in our library. The PPP gets a small amount of compensation when you make a purchase, and we thank you for that.
Indeed we do, and we also want to thank our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier. I'll start with DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Paul in Colorado, Jerry in Texas, Joseph in Texas, Kathy from North Carolina, Lori from Washington, Carlos in California, Brian in the UK, Ned from Connecticut, Jerry from Washington, Joe in Washington, and Erwin from the Netherlands.
There is also Dylan in Australia, Ben in Minnesota, Anthony in Texas, Karen in the UK, Zaksu in Illinois, Brian in Texas, Sarah in New Jersey, June in Ireland, Joshua in Massachusetts, Lucy in Texas, Connor in North Carolina, Keith in Alabama, Carson in Oklahoma, Vivian in California, James in Massachusetts, Anne in Kentucky, and Roger in Michigan. Thank you all so much for your support.
Indeed, thank you very, very much.
Make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe now through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, your GPS reroutes for 6,000 Cavalry to Barlaman at theprancingponypodcast.com. And if you want your voice literally heard, well, just send us audio of your question. You can visit podinbox.com/prancingponypod and record your question for us.
Please be sure to still email the question to Barlaman. Even though Barlaman's been a lot more reliable lately, there's still a lot of mail to sort through. We'll try to get to you just as soon as we're able.
Indeed. As always, though, this has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Raise a glass, enjoy a cuppa, and enjoy reading Tolkien. Goodbye.